It's my pleasure to introduce this panel today, or to actually introduce Stuart, who's going to take care of introducing the panel. And one of the things I would like to say is that mostly I've spent my life doing stream work, but I was fortunate enough to be involved with the Tyson's task force for 5 years. And I learned a great deal about smart growth, and I was reminded as I was working on the task force for 5 years that years ago, the Center for Watershed Protection, in one of their first documents, produced something called the 8 Tools of Watershed Protection. And it's hierarchical. And the first tool is land use. The second tool is land conservation. The third tool is buffers. The fourth is erosion and sediment control. And the fifth is stormwater. And we often rush to the lower sections of that. There's 3 more, but those are the 5 biggies. We often talk about stormwater when, if we really want to protect watersheds, we should start at the top and talk about land use. So I'm very pleased to have this panel here today to talk about what should be the #1 way to protect watersheds, which is land use. And Stuart?
Yes.
Stuart Schwartz is the head of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. I've had the pleasure of working with him for 15 years.
Yeah, something like that.
Anyway.
15.
He brings a great deal of wisdom to this, and I look forward to hearing the panel.
Thank you, Stella. Stella got me into this, yes, and Joy Oakes and a few others in this room, about 15 years ago. All in favor of hiring Stuart to run the coalition. That was how it went. Bonnie, that's right. And I didn't know what I was getting into. Yes, the coalition was founded by some of the region's larger conservation groups. I think NWF was there at the founding as well, Piedmont Environmental Council, Audubon Naturalist. Joy was a Sierra Club at the time, as was Bonnie. And since then, we've really become a leading organization addressing where and how the Washington, D.C. region grows. We think it's one of the most critical issues that underlies many of the challenges we face, whether economic or transportation or environmental. We have webs of partnerships now with business community, housing community members, and others. I'd first like to thank the organizers of this amazing conference. This is truly one of the best I've ever seen. Nice job, Hillary and the team. Thank you for the funders. And I'm exhausted. This has been a very high-energy conference with more positive networking and learning than I've seen in a very long time. What I'm going to do is just do an initial overview. It's a few slides taken from our Blueprint for a Better Region that we first did back in 2002 with support from the Prince Foundation and others. PEC and CBF helped us with this. We show many versions of it over the years, but it's about really where and how we grow. And then you're going to have within this panel, I'll be followed by Bill Kastning, who's the Director of Planning and Codes in Denton, Maryland. You heard from a small town last night, and it was pretty dynamic what Edmondson was doing in building better communities that were more walkable, more bikeable, and greener. And I think we're going to hear the same thing from rural Denton, Maryland, from the Eastern Shore. They're in a way, the little town that could. You may have heard about their fight over growth that they'd had, and you'll hear about that. When he arrives, Chris Zimmerman, who is the chair of the Arlington County Board, will be here to talk about the urban environment, very urban. He'll be talking about the Roslyn-Ballston corridor and the Crystal City corridor and what Arlington's done. Arlington won the first EPA Smart Growth Award when they first started issuing those awards. Chris is probably our top regional expert from an elected official perspective on transit-oriented development, and walkable, bikeable communities. I think what's happened over time, once they got the location right and the focusing the development, they've been tweaking it and adding the other features that they know they need to do, as we've learned, and we'll hear about what they're trying to do on the stormwater side as part of that. One of the things I'd like to point out with Arlington, the RB corridor takes up 2.5 square miles. They estimate it would take 14 square miles if that amount of development had gone into a suburban mode. And then finally, we'll have Bill Stack, the Deputy Director of Programs at the Center for Watershed Protection. Stella first introduced me to this group, and she served on their board for a very long time. And they do, I was going to say groundbreaking research, but that's not a good term to use at a stormwater conference. They do cutting-edge research, and they really helped teach us all a great deal. So let me start, and I want you to look quickly. This is going to be like the millennial generation, attention deficit disorder, fast slideshow, just to give you the overall perspective. We're looking from the Blue Ridge to the Bay with the city in between. This is the Chesapeake Bay Foundation University of Maryland study back in 2000 showing where growth was then and where they feared it was going. So this is what we're trying to deal with. How can we use our land more sustainably than that? And plan better communities than this, with acres of parking lots where you have to drive everywhere. And so all the components of a village, but no center, no walkability. Or our high-tech office parks that are low-tech when it comes to community planning. This is the Dulles Corridor, parking lots that are bigger than the office building footprints. And parking lots, and parking lots, and parking lots, because of the way we built our world. More parking lots. And not very much walkability. You'll see their look of fear on their faces. In Tyson's Corner. More parking lots, even at our metro stations. This is Greenbelt. Governor Glendening did help us save Indian Creek there and all that land, but we still don't have a good mixed-use development plan for that parking lot. Or Vienna Metro, 1988 picture of Vienna Metro parking lots. This is all important from the climate perspective, what we do in terms of where we have and we grow, because transportation and buildings are the biggest portion of our energy use and our climate emissions. So green buildings are a big part of this. But can we get greener transportation? It's not just better cars, it's more walkable communities, more transit, being able to drive less. We've got a great opportunity in the Washington, D.C. region to stop growing outward because we have this amazing metro system and parts of it planned to be added to it. And we have great success stories right here in Washington, D.C. Galway Place used to have parking lots everywhere. Now it has this, right on top of the metro station and the Verizon Center just behind it. And activity, vibrancy that's happening. Here's why it's important from an environmental perspective. Town of Herndon, there's the town. There's the Gallery Place development area in yellow. The circle is how much land the Gallery Place development would take up in the suburbs. So this is why an environmentalist like yours truly becomes a big supporter of urban revitalization and redevelopment. Tyson's, Stella and I spent 7-8 years of our life on Tyson's recently, and we'll spend a few more. There are more acres or more square feet of parking lots in Tyson than there are in commercial development and buildings in Tyson's Corner. Some 40-some million square feet throughout that. You can see how gray it is generally. 4 metro stations coming, lots of parking lots today, including those at the mall, unbelievable traffic, but we have all the elements of a community, just disconnected, just lots of parking lots, and we can reinvent it. This was from our original drawing back in 2002, which then became an inspiration for the replanning of Tyson's shown here. And it's not just Tyson's, it's our commercial corridors. There's one older commercial corridor there, much like Columbia Pike and Arlington. How do we reinvent these places and add them at a medium density scale? And do we create great places for people? This is really what Edmondson's about, or what the way the mayor talked about it. This is about creating great communities, and doing the green with it as we do it will truly make these great communities walkable, bikeable, green, active, vibrant. There's the park at Ballston. That's our small towns too. I don't want to forget those. A number of shots from the Shenandoah Valley of our small towns, and that's why you'll hear from Denton, Maryland today as well. And again, finally, with the commercial corridors, we did this quick study of the Route 1 corridors, at least 600 acres of parking lots and one-story buildings. This is much of it on the ridge line with streams flowing into the Potomac. There's just the Beacon Hill Mall area alone. This is a key priority for the coalition to revitalize that area. There's the Beacon Hill Mall area. There's our educational map we did. You'll see the stream picture on the left. Over 300 people signed a survey for us supporting revitalization Route 1 when we went to the polls, and we used this map showing the upper and lower parts of the corridor. You see the streams. We have stream plans, but we can't fix them unless we can fix those parking lots, unless we can redesign, redevelop those areas. We can do the downstream work, but we can't get the origins of so much of the stormwater fixed without doing something about those parking lots in the upper area, creating great walkable communities. There's Kentlands up in Maryland. And so the right development in the right places with good design, and of course, we're going to talk about good stormwater management. So that's sort of our regional framing of the story. So now let me turn it over. We're going to work from rural to into urban, and so Bill Kastnick from Denton, Maryland will now give his presentation on what they do in the rural small town context. Thank you.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss a little town on the Eastern Shore with you this morning, and what we've done to make some significant changes in terms of sustainability as well as improving the water quality. So if you bear with me a little bit, I'll give you a sense of place here so you understand what Denton is all about. Denton, as you know, is on the eastern shore. It's on Caroline County. It's about 12 miles from the Delaware border, and it also is located in an agrarian community. It is on the Choptank River, which many of you know is probably the worst polluted river in the state, and one of the few that's going in the wrong direction, if not the only one that's going in the wrong direction. So we have a challenge there, as does Caroline County, to improve water quality. Give you a little indication of what we're all about. We're about 4,000 residents. Haven't figured out from the latest census what it was. ACS told us we were 4,022, but we'll see. We're 5.2 square miles, and you'll see that a lot of that is currently vacant. We're the county seat, and as I mentioned, we're located in an agricultural area. A lot of CAFOs there, a lot of grain kind of agriculture. We straddle the Choptank River, and for those of you that are Maryland, you know about the Critical Area Commission, which regulates any tidal waters in the state. And we have about 6 miles of tidal waters along the Choptank, and it's unique in that it's not saline, it is freshwater tidal. As I mentioned, we've had increase in nitrogen over the last 3 decades, going in the wrong direction, perhaps primarily from agriculture, although there's a lot of scientific study now taking place to determine that. And we have a lot of environmental amenities, as I'll discuss here. One thing you need to realize about our town, and this all precedes me, I arrived in 2008 as the planner for Denton, but they had been on an annexation kick and decided that they would annex property around the town, and they weren't finished by the time the town council was voted out and a new town council was voted in. But they more than doubled the square miles of the town, and they added 853 acres on the other side of the Choptank, which is only accessible by a bridge that goes through the county. So it's not a very, the new area there, the 853 acres, is not very walkable. It's not connected with the town. And it has about 3 miles of waterfront on the Choptank River. My to-do was rewrite the comp plan and fix a problem. Had this been built out, they annexed all this in with annexation agreements that pretty much said it would be all become residential. And therefore the town would ultimately grow from 3,500 at that time to 30,000. And the residents certainly didn't want that, and the new town council didn't want it, and the new members of the Planning Commission didn't want it, so our to-do was go fix that problem. But you're dealt the hand already. De-annexation is very difficult. It has a lot of legal consequences. We didn't want to go that route. That's kind of an aerial of Denton. The yellow line is the corporate boundary. You'll see that a lot of the areas they annexed are forested or ag, and there are a lot of streams there, which I'll show you in a second. In terms of natural resources, we have a lot of amenities. We have a lot of forests. We have a lot of wetlands. Obviously, we have a lot of streams and the Choptank River, and certainly all those things need to be protected. Here's a chart showing the streams not only within the town, but the surrounding area. So we went into a comprehensive plan with and ultimately a rezoning and a new subdivision set of ordinances which were designed to protect our environmental resources, but also with the appropriate desire of the community to reduce the ultimate build out from 30,000 down to 10,000. We also have Tier 2 waters, either in the town or along the side of the town, and obviously those require special protection as well. Those of you that are in Maryland in the critical area, you know that they're critical area designations. And on the western shore of the Choptank River, the green color there, the light green color, is resource conservation area. That's an area that requires most of the protection. The old core of the town, which is yellow, or the orange, is IDA, which is intensely developed and has different regulations in terms of development and redevelopment. And then you have the yellow, which is limited development that allows you a little less density But in all of these areas, you have to protect what it is you need to do in order to protect the waters of the chop tank. And that's a close-up of it. You'll see in these areas here, those are 1,000-foot buffers. And basically, with a comprehensive plan and the rezoning, we took those off from development. Yes, you can have growth allocations, but town is not inclined to award those, neither is the county, and ultimately the Critical Area Commission would have to award those. What we did, we rezoned those as one house per 20 acres, and that severely limited it, the future development. A lot of forest cover in the town, as I mentioned. The objective there is to protect that, certainly around the stream buffers where it exists. Okay, our goals were to have sustainable and equitable development. Certainly it wasn't going that route because growing from 4,000 to 30,000 without having the employment and the employment opportunities and non-residential opportunities, we needed to deal with that. We wanted to reduce the amount of land per capita, which we've done. We wanted to reduce the amount of stormwater capita, which we've done. Obviously protect the streams, retain the forests, and protect the wetlands in sensitive areas. And basically what we did was, instead of calculating density based on gross area, we said anything that was environmentally constrained or an environmental resource, we took that out of the density calculation. So you had a gross area less all the environmentally constrained stuff that gave you net density, and then the density is calculated based on that. So that was, and then some zoning changes. We changed a lot of residential zones to non-residential uses because we wanted more economic development, more job opportunities, et cetera. And by doing all that, we were able to reduce the growth to ultimate growth to 10,000. But we have some other tricks up our sleeves. Being that so much of the town that was annexed in was agriculture in nature, we wanted to retain that agriculture until such time if and when it was developed. And so we want to do that in a sustainable manner. We have a lot of parks in town and 3 schools, soon a 4th school, and we have old railroad beds, so we're going to have a lot of interconnectivity, planned trails and greenways for creating more of a walkable community. We also established a growth boundary in concert with the county, basically saying here's as big as the town is going to get, and when we enter into a TDR program with the county, all the monies that the developers give, the TDR impact fee, if you will, that goes to the county will be used to conserve land around the town so that ultimately we can't go beyond that area. We do obviously have water plants and wastewater treatment plants, and we also have a very old stormwater system, so old that nobody knows where the stuff goes. And so we'll have to figure out that and do the appropriate work there. We prioritized our growth to be infill and redevelopment, and the areas that were annexed in are low in the priority scheme unless they have now a commercial component. And all of this balances the residential and non-residential. And as we improve our stormwater, we're going to use regenerative stormwater conveyances. What we've done, as I'm indicated, we updated our comp plan, our land use and land subdivision, and our zoning ordinances, and we have consistency so that there won't be any lawsuits saying the comp plan and the ordinances are inconsistent. And we now have a more graceful expansion plan than would have occurred. We have a lot of mixed-use developments, planned unit developments, and planned neighborhood zones. We've increased the densities as appropriate, where appropriate, and although we don't want to annex a lot, there may be a few annexations that make sense to round out the community, and those annexations would only be for commercial uses. As I indicated, we created the green belt, and we have defined the greenways and trails, and now are getting ready to implement those, et cetera, et cetera. So we did update the stormwater management ordinance to conform with the new state regulations. We were number 9 in the state to do that. We did it so quickly that we had to redo it because the legislature changed the rules during an emergency session. But nonetheless, we were one of the first to do that. One of the important things we did was create capacity management plans for our water system and our wastewater system. Although we could grow to 10,000 if we had the infrastructure to support that, by that I mean the water and wastewater facilities, we don't. And those are very expensive to do. And anything on the west side of the Choptank River, we've decided would not be supported by the existing water or wastewater treatment facilities. So if and when someone wants to build, and when you have an annexation agreement, you're stuck, because whatever that annexation agreement says, that's what the parties have agreed to, the developer, the landowner, and the town. So the developer saw the handwriting on the wall plus the economic situation, and he walked, but the rights for the annexation agreement still reside with the landowners. And so what we're insisting upon is if anybody develops on that side, it'll be developed a lot less. Instead of 3,000 homes, it's been cut down to 1,500. Not that we want the development at all. We prefer that it stay open space and ag. But if it does, they're going to have to provide the infrastructure at their cost. The town residents aren't. We're not going to expand our facilities across the river. It's very expensive to do so. Secondly, the capacities that we have in the systems, we decided that we would straight line those over the 20-year planning period, and as such, only 44 homes a year can be built. First priority is given to infill, that can be built, redevelopment can be built, and all non-residential can be built. After that, you're left with residential, and because of our constrained capacities over the 20-year period, it's only 44 homes a year. And instead of growing to 10,000 over the 20-year period, it's more like 7,000. Now, that's a policy. That can be changed going forward. At some point in time, it might make sense to increase the capacities. And while I'm all capacities, the wastewater treatment plant, which is currently BNR, is being upgraded to ENR. And that pretty much will allow us to meet the commitment, the TMDL commitment that's being assigned to the town. At least we think so. Obviously, that hasn't been done yet. So our nutrients will have been met. However, we do have a huge sedimentation issue that has to be dealt with, not only from within the town, but obviously the surrounding area, the ag area. Earlier in your session, Kathleen Freeman was here. She was on a panel discussing the Phase 2 WIP that Caroline County and Anne Arundel involved in. We participated with that group. We have a lot more unified approach to things than in the past when lawsuits were flying back and forth between the town and the county. So we now have new land uses, and everything on the left side of the Choptank, the west side of the Choptank, is ag, and it's going to stay that way. There's a resource conservation area, as I mentioned. The outlying areas, the light yellow, are also ag, and they'll stay that way. But all of those areas that were annexed in have an annexation agreement, and the annexation agreements say they would be developed as planned neighborhoods, which is anywhere from 4.5 to 6 dwelling units per acre. Maybe not intense from an urban focus, but it's pretty intense for a rural focus. And we're kind of stuck with that. You can't, and we did actually renegotiate 2 annexation agreements with landowners who saw the handwriting on the wall. This this white knight giving them all the money was not going to appear. So we negotiated going back to ag and very few homes. And then, of course, we have the zoning overlay that was applied as well. And the light blue area there is, and the red is the areas that we increased for non-residential, so that where the county seat, the county basically has very little retail, commercial, et cetera, because 15 miles down the road is Easton, which is a very viable community. And then 12 miles away, you have Delaware, where you can go and buy stuff and not have to pay sales tax. So, but whether you like it or not, a Walmart is coming into the town. For an agrarian community like us, a Walmart is probably a good thing, and that'll bring in some more retail and commercial opportunities, and also allow for employment opportunities. And we have in the midst of the old part of the town a redevelopment area, and basically the zoning there will apply, but anything that's in there can be, we can basically renegotiate the densities and the type uses. What we plan to do is update our forest conservation ordinance. Actually, that was introduced earlier in this week, and obviously that will protect that resource, especially around the streams. We're going to update the critical area ordinance, even though we have to conform to it now. It's appropriate that you have your own critical area ordinance within the town. We're adding stormwater management responsibility to the Utility Commission. That ordinance was introduced a week ago, Monday, and basically we're getting ahead of the curve. We are going to now have a means by which to charge stormwater fees for all the retrofits and the maintenance items that need to be done in town to improve the stormwater quality. As I mentioned, we're upgrading the wastewater treatment plant to ENR. That'll be completed probably mid-year. We're in the midst of adopting green building ordinances in the town as well, which will go a long way to greening the town. We want our town to be transportation oriented. You know, basically it's a town that is a bedroom town for Annapolis and Easton and Salisbury and Delaware towns. So, but as we increase the employment opportunities in town, we want to be able to provide transportation within the town, and that's why we're going to institute a trolley system that can take you between parks, between schools, and between businesses and your homes. As I mentioned, we're going to retrofit our stormwater facilities. We've got some plans in the work there already along the state highways that run in the town to create rain gardens, etc. And a new school is coming in town, and rather than initially, as the Caroline schools wanted to do, was locate another school out in the boonies where there was no infrastructure, we convinced them to come into the town. And certainly that will eliminate a very large septic system, probably one that MDE wouldn't have allowed anyway. We're going to adopt what the county is doing for best management practices for ag, even though ultimately we may not have any ag in town, but for the next 2 decades we will. And whatever is adopted for TMDL considerations out in the county, we will replicate within the town. Another tool we have is identifying priority funding areas, and for those of you in Maryland, you know this, but if you identify priority funding areas, those are the areas in the town or in the county where you want growth to occur, and that makes you eligible for state funding, assuming it's available, and that to pay for your infrastructure. So although the original town council wanted everything west of the Choptank to be a priority funding area, not going to happen. Somebody wants to develop that, we're going to do it on their own. And as I indicated, we have basically no idea where our stormwater goes, and we know it goes into the Choptank, but we need to identify what the existing facilities are and how those could be enhanced. Some lessons that we've learned is through our town, we can protect the environment through zoning and land subdivision ordinances. We did that very effectively, and we're protecting all our natural resources, including water. And the growth can be equitable and sustainable, and certainly from a political perspective, it was much more what the town wanted. The town previously, when they were doing this annexation kick, they never asked the townspeople what they wanted. when we got there, when the planning commission and the planning staff did a town-wide survey and asked the people what they want, and that's how we found out they didn't want to grow past 10,000. And the TM deals can be accommodated. And even though we're accommodating them with ENR upgrade, we're going to do more than that. You know, yeah, we can get off the hook by just finishing the upgrade of the plant, but certainly we're going to go on above that. So we got ahead of the curve, hopefully, not without a lot of trouble and a lot more trouble and difficulties ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, we have annexation agreements and we have development rights and responsibility agreements. Be careful what you enter into, because once you enter into those, it's very difficult to change them unless both parties agree. And so rather than buck the system, we just changed the zoning on certain people, which is very allowable and very legally permissible. And that concludes what I have to say.
Thank you, Bill. Well, there you have a nice cookbook for small towns around the region in terms of all the things you need to do to plan more sustainably. I think the vision part is almost the easiest part, returning to the way we used to build our towns. The implementation part has become increasingly complex in terms of the things you need to do. Note the emphasis on infill and redevelopment. Also, I'd be interested, as we have the discussion and as things go forward in our region, as we try to work on do the Phase 2 WIPs, how we ensure that land use, these types of land use solutions are integrated into those WIPs. Chris Zimmerman, the current chair of the Arlington County Board, will take us into a whole different development environment, that of Arlington and its Roslyn Ballston corridor and some of the other things that Arlington County is doing. As I mentioned earlier, he's sort of the guru of transit and transit-oriented development in our region, and so it's going to be hard to keep him to the 15 to 17 minutes or so because he's got so much to tell you, but we'll do our best. And again, questions and answers will be at the end. Thank you.
I take that's a warning about the time, so I will try to watch it. Something with water in the title. I think it's the only one that says water. There's a file that says CZ presentation, and in there, there's something that says something about water. I sure hope. Yeah, that's not it. That's it. Told you there was water in there.
He makes a few presentations. And Chris, you can have elected official privilege, which is, a little.
Just a little bit, yeah. 30 seconds maybe. Thank you very much. I guess that this is kind of the opposite. We're sort of bookends, I think, with the last from a rural community in the Chesapeake watershed to one of the most urban. So there's an awful lot that's, of course, different about my community. But what it obviously has in common is we're all pouring all our water into the same watershed. And then a lot of things you have to do are really very similar also. But this may highlight some of the differences in the kind of issues we deal with, I suppose. Let's see, does this make it go? Oh, it does, okay. Well, I give a lot of presentations in a lot of places. Some people don't always know where Arlington is. Presumably, a lot of people in this room do know where it is, but it's still worth noting a couple things about the geography just to start with. One being, obviously, we're part of the original District of Columbia. That's the reason for the shape. And that means we're close in, obviously right by the center. Although on a day like today, getting to the bus and to the train there can still take a little longer. But it's also, the main point, I guess, is although we are a county, I mean, that is the way we're styled in our sort of legal status, we're a small, geographically small community. We're only 26.5 square miles, and making us effectively the smallest county geographically in the country. That said, on the other hand, we're a pretty big place. We have a lot of people in a small area with a population that, I'm not sure they've fully finished tabulating, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 210,000 people, which means that we have around 8,000 people per square mile, one of the densest communities anywhere. I guess I'd also note that we have 42% of that area is impervious cover, a number which has actually gone slightly down due to our development policies, but obviously is high, is an urban number. with 366 miles of public storm sewers and 28.5 miles of perennial streams. Like many urban communities, a lot of what used to be perennial streams are now things in pipes underground, and that, of course, is part of the issue. We're an employment center, and that means that we have more people that come in than leave during the day, so that the daytime population is something like, maybe 280,000, bigger than what we have. And we have a lot of people who come to work. There's a lot of place for people to work. With 40 million square feet of private office space, that makes us bigger than the downtowns of, and we vary the list all the time, but it's most of the downtowns you can think of, Denver, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, take a pick. And that's not counting the world's biggest office building, of course, which is the Pentagon, because that's on the governmental side. So, point is, a whole lot of people are coming here every day. It's used pretty intensively. But the main fact of Arlington and kind of why it is noted and why Stuart likes us is that the way in which it's been developed, which is to largely concentrate all that development on a small percentage of land area. So if you're looking at this is the map of the whole county. These grayed areas here are the metro station sectors. They're all walking distance from metro, and those account for about 9/10 of the development in the county. And so in many ways, that is our main contribution, because that pattern reduces what you need to support 200,000 people and 200,000 jobs and all. And it, in the long term, has a big impact on problems like runoff of stormwater. And of course, it's made possible by transit. And I'm not going to say a lot about that, but as Stuart says, that's an issue in which I'm been pretty wrapped up in. So. And our county's pretty wrapped up in, because again, that is why it was able to do this on about 10% of the land area of this very urban county. The Roslyn-Ballston corridor is the one that's gotten kind of the most attention. It's 5 stations, and it's got more than half of that office space, and basically developed the vast majority of it, about 3/4 of it, since the opening of the Orange Line to Ballston 30 years ago. It's mixed use. A lot of people live there as well. The other one is the Blue-Yellow Line corridor, which has Crystal City and Pentagon City, as well as the Pentagon and airport stations. But obviously, those aren't development centers in the same way. But again, also being intensely developed. So the main point is the reason we get to call this smart growth is fundamentally because of that concentration in those corridors. The other, 88% or so of the county is essentially developed the way it was 40 years ago. Which is, lower density levels of single-family neighborhoods, garden apartments, parks, and preserved green space. This is the map from 1972 when they were first planning this out, and had the bullseye concept. Nobody had the word smart growth then, but the idea was, target the development right on the metro stations, and that's pretty much what they did, and then put it on the land use map. So, what you can see, and obviously you can't see a lot of detail, but all you really need to know is, the light yellow is the low density. The dark, lots of colors is the higher density on the map, and you can see they're clustered in here. There's a few other areas of modest density, like the Columbia Pike corridor, where we're also using transit to develop in a way that is intended also to be walkable, not as intense as a Ballston or a Roslyn or anything like that, but nonetheless showing that at a lower level you can still have compact development that is transit-oriented. This is an aerial view that gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of how the development pattern works. So this is, Roslyn up at the top here. This is the Potomac River, Washington Monument. So this is the line of the train. The train literally runs underneath the road right there. And what that means, if you look at sort of what's not in there, which is that the development, again, hugs that line, and on the outside of it, we have the lower density that remains. So that's the basic development pattern. There are a lot of benefits that flow from that. Again, I'll just, roughly give you some numbers that emphasize this. Transit usage, this was 10 years ago, actually. I still have to update some of these. We have some new census data hopefully coming. But, as you can see, we were higher by far than not only the national average, but by the neighboring suburban county in the number of people that the percentage of people that use transit to get to their jobs every day. It's probably a little higher than that now. But we're also way above in walking to work. And that's a large part of the story too, is that we've created an environment which, transit enables it, but a lot of the trips aren't transit trips at all. They're just people walking because you can. Again, car ownership is one index. 90% of U.S. households, generally speaking, have a car. 55% have two or more. Fairfax, 96% have at least one, and 2/3 have two or more. In Arlington, 12% have 0 cars. Less than 40% have two or more, and that's in a fairly high-income county. So those are people who get to choose not to, be paying for and storing all those automobiles. And it's even higher when you get into the corridors. People who live in the corridors, like 1 in 5 don't own a car, and those are high-income folks. So here's some of the real benefits. If you look at weekday auto trips, this is some fairly recent data. Around the region, these suburban counties are all very high, typically around 5 trips a day per household. As you can see, Arlington below them, and the corridors themselves even farther below. But the numbers are more dramatic if you look at vehicle miles traveled, which is one of the most significant factors in almost every adverse environmental impact in our region, including stormwater, because of the impervious surface it reflects. But places like Loudoun, Prince William, the average household is driving 50 miles every single day. Fairfax is only at 35. Arlington is substantially lower, around 20, and then if you go into the corridors, you're below 20. So this kind of development can have a real impact on how much people are using their cars. And then just to, again, to emphasize the point, it really shows that even though we're a very small county, we're 26 square miles, Fairfax County is 400 square miles, we're only using a couple of square miles basically to do all this. So, this is Ballston, Virginia Square from the sky, and you can see it really concentrated around the station. This is I-66, and this is the lower density development all around it, again, concentrated around 2 stations. Okay, so add to that that the county has a commitment in many different ways to environmental responsibility, and is proud to say that when it was still the 20th century, we adopted LEED. So most of the first LEED buildings, LEED certified, LEED silver, LEED private, LEED public, whatever, happened in Arlington, because we got into that early, and we started working on things like green roofs and generally green building and incentive and education programs that would emphasize a broad range of strategies, including water conservation strategies, as part of that. We also have an urban forestry plan as part of our master plan, and have worked to try and restore the urban tree canopy, so that we actually, according to Virginia Tech, some data last year, we have a higher percentage of our area that is urban, that is the tree canopy, than Fairfax, which is kind of counterintuitive. And that obviously is, again, one more thing that contributes to dealing with stormwater runoff and water problems generally. Of course, we have Chesapeake Bay ordinance. That, the state mandate to do something at Chesapeake Bay did have some positive benefits in Virginia, and we're part of that as well, like other local governments. Okay, that's all the good stuff. Now I'm through bragging. Now here's the bad part. Our infrastructure is old. Our county was one of the places developed earliest in Northern Virginia, which means it got developed at a time when there weren't very many good practices in place. Most of the county was developed because the intense part, that 10%, that's largely new. The rest of the stuff preserved is therefore old. So something like 4/5 of our housing stock was built before 1960. That makes it charming, but also in need of maintenance, as I can tell you as the owner of a house built in 1920. But that's also true of all the infrastructure that supports it that people don't generally see or think about, most folks, except for people like those in this room who think about it intensively. Most people don't, and they just expect that the water gets somehow I flush and it gets taken care of. And most of the underground pipe network, we have 360 miles of underground pipe that's more than 60% of which is over 50 years old. And it's mostly concrete pipes, which have a life of 50 to 75 years. So that's a problem. And as I said, most of this is before modern stormwater and floodplain management regulations were in place. And so most of the stormwater runoff of the county is not controlled to reduce the volume or remove pollutants before it's discharged to local streams through the storm sewer network. And in some parts of the county, built obviously before Chesapeake Bay and before resource protection areas, private properties and homes were built real close to streams, resulting in frequent flooding and property damage, leading to people pushing for things that result in channelization of streams to reduce flood risk, which have all the other problems that you all know about. So essentially, we're in the last 10, 15 years trying to catch up to decades and decades of development problems. So I said this, so we are trying to do things. We're trying to do a lot of different things, but there's a lot to do. We've, in no particular order, but perhaps the most significant thing, obviously Chess Bay came in, did force everybody to do certain things, like map the resource protection areas and start making people do some things if they were going to build in them. That will have less impact in a community like ours simply because there's not as much of it to build. It'll have, more of an impact in places that aren't yet built. We established about 3 years ago a sanitary district to essentially provide dedicated funding to deal with stormwater and watershed management issues, which is an unusual thing for us to do. Our county tradition has not been for like special tax districts and all that. And this is basically an add-on to everybody's property tax that is dedicated entirely to this effort. As a result of which we have a number of different program initiatives that have been underway and are continuing to kind of deal with this. And I'm just going to touch on a few. How am I doing on time?
You've got 4 more minutes.
Okay, 4 more minutes. Okay, so I have to start quick. So, I'll touch on a few of the kinds of things we're doing, and, it's more of a sampling. But, they range from, things done to facilities, our own, as well as those we push for in private development, obviously things like green roofs and green streets. This is an example where our county's commitment to doing this with our own facilities. We happen to have been in a period of fairly rapid building of county infrastructure of different kinds, facilities in particular. This is a major center that deals with a lot of the operations side of the county, Parks Department and streets and things like that. And there's an example with the rainwater cistern built into it. One of the features of what is a LEED Silver building. Use of permeable pavers, and a lot of these things too. And people in this room probably know you try a lot of different things. Some of these things are proving to work better than others, and some things you tried early you didn't do the right way. And I think we have a lot of that experience. But this is just to give you an idea that we're sort of trying a lot of stuff. So again, pavers on parking lots. Again, the use of green roofs. This one happens to be in Walter Reed Community Center. There's one outside my window at Courthouse Plaza where we tried retrofitting just to do something. And so a building built in the 80s, which overall is not exactly the standards you would like today. We've tried to do this kind of thing in various places. This building happened to be a newly built structure designed with a green roof and other features. Again, and also on the private side, we're trying to encourage this kind of thing. This is an apartment building again. We are starting a green streets kind of effort. I think we've identified a couple hundred potential projects, but we have 7 actually in design that will be moving forward this year that cover about 8 acres of impervious area, which may not be impressive in some communities, but again, remember, we're only 26 square miles, so an acre's a big area. Again, various kinds of things. This is a tree box filter. It's part of the storm drain. Fire retention areas for parking lots. Again, trying to deal with the fact we do have some surface parking lots, and that's obviously a big source of runoff. This is another one at another center. And then even in parks themselves, this is the rain garden at Powhatan Springs Park, which serves kind of multiple functions, but part of it is dealing with stormwater. So that gives you an idea of some of the kinds of things that we've been trying. We also have an extensive stream restoration effort. Again, the county, like a lot of developed places, is one in which we've put a lot of things over time into channels, and we're trying to reverse some of the impacts of that. I got to say something about the Ballston Beaver Pond, and I really don't have as good a picture as I should have of it, but if you're not familiar with this, Ballston, which is one of our central downtown areas, has a metro station, has the highway coming in, I-66 exits there, and there's this area where the off-ramp was that was essentially stormwater retention for I-66. And it just sort of evolved into a little local ecology, and sometime in the 90s, beavers moved in, and other kinds of wildlife, and kind of made it home, which was very charming. But we've also found that over time, the beavers damming the thing, caused the water level to rise higher than had been expected. We got wetlands and all, and that's good. And for a while, that was really fine. And there is an amazing variety of wildlife: muskrat, geese, ducks, herons, egrets, red-winged blackbirds, fish, turtles, all kinds of things. That's good. But over the years, the pond filled up with sediment, and so it's not really functioning as originally designed. So we have an improvement project that's intended to create a new flow pattern that will help keep water in the pond longer, so to allow the wetland plants to remove more of the nutrients and other pollutants before the water flows out of the pond. I think that's supposed to be done this year. So it's nice to have a little bit of nature there, and hopefully it can help us also. Again, streams all over the county. This is one example in the north end of the county. As you can see, a fairly low-density area with a school over here, and this is kind of this will give you a better idea. This is the Potomac River up here. This is Donaldson Run, and 3 tributaries flowing in. Again, this is a classic case of over time the stream being really overrun by erosion, all the runoff from everything else, undermining everything along the way, and eventually it kind of gets straightened out at the speed of the water flows, and you're not getting the filtering. And then you're having all kinds of other problems. The project we've actually done is on tributary A. This is this year's project. But just to give you an idea, again, here's the erosion. You can see trees, being basically the roots exposed. Infrastructure, ironically, that's put there, then getting exposed, undermining that, and creating other problems for stormwater. So the program essentially tries to restore a more natural meandering stream with pools for the water to gather in, and again, for it to be able to do its filtering job. This one was completed in 2006. That's the tributary A. The project we're doing this year, this I find interesting, is the result of people in the community pushing for it. And we have a program called neighborhood conservation. Without going into a lot of detail, it lets neighborhoods make improvements with our bond money. So typically it's street lights, playgrounds, things like that, but the community gets to decide what they want. This community decided what they wanted was to fix the stream. So that's how this is being funded for this next part of it. Now, the biggest one of all in Arlington is the 4 Mile Run watershed, and I'll finish on this one. So this is the county roughly, and 4 Mile Run comes down here. Here's Alexandria. It makes the border with Alexandria in the larger part and then runs all the way out to here. The 4 Mile Run project that's been underway for several years now is a joint Arlington-Alexandria effort focused on this section that's between our 2 jurisdictions. And the 2 communities have worked closely together. Our citizens have been involved in it, and our congressman has been helping in funding. We've had the Corps of Engineers involved, regional bodies, and so on, really looking comprehensively at this and developing what is a long-term plan to deal with this. Now, the thing about 4 Mile Run is at one time it flooded a lot. And that's just a few decades ago. And so when that happened in the old days, what happened, of course, is the Corps of Engineers came in and fixed that problem. And they dug things up and put up walls of concrete. And when they were done, you didn't have a flooding problem anymore. It worked. We don't have the flooding problem anymore. But as we know, you wind up having other problems with this. The good news is the Corps of Engineers understands that apparently also now. I have to say they have been very cooperative through this process. And so we have a pretty extensive approach, and you can see some of the barriers and all this, that is intended to restore the stream to a substantial degree to a more natural state that will do more of the filtration and slow down the flow. Also create a better environment for people, because it can be a much better environment as a natural environment, one for people to enjoy and one to bring our 2 communities together. So we've worked on that quite a bit. Focusing particularly on this area. So it's a long-term project. There's a lot of information about it on the website. It's one of the more important things I think we're going to do. The last thing I should note that, again, this is the low point of the county. So, what that means, of course, is that's where our water pollution control plant is that has to process something like 39 million gallons a day and, take everything we flush and turn it into something that at the end where it comes out into the river here, you can literally drink. This plant, of course, like everything else, was old. And, we can talk about lots of the small things we're doing, some of which are very visible, like green streets, green roofs, and all that. But the truth is, the stuff that really makes the biggest impact is often the things people don't see or want to think about. This is the biggest infrastructure project my county's ever been involved in. I'm pretty sure in real terms even bigger than Metro in terms of the size of the investment. We are just now finishing this year that project, which has been a decade, and over $500 million. It's more than a $500 million project upgrading this. Up until this past year, when we had real bad storm incidents, like June 28th, 2006, one of those dates I won't forget. I was chairman and we had incredible flooding. This thing we would have overruns and basically discharge. It would become overwhelmed and you get stuff going into the 4 Mile Run and then Potomac and into the Chesapeake that you don't want going there. This project essentially has invested enough into that so that can't happen. So that that we can withstand a whole lot of inundation and not have that kind of discharge. So, this is, I think, one of the most important basic things, along with a whole lot of other investment in infrastructure. We're relining pipes and doing all that kind of thing. But it gives you some idea, I think, of the challenges in an urban community of ensuring that we take care of the watershed that ultimately we all depend on. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chris. Now to turn to Bill Stack, basically one of our water quality and stormwater think tank people, Center for Watershed Protection. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Can everyone see me, hear me? Let's see. Which one of these? Great. I'm going to be talking about, you heard a presentation about a rural community that's urbanizing and then a suburban community. It's more of an urban community. I'm going to talk this morning about the ultra-urban community and how saving our watersheds really is the same thing as greening our cities. They're interconnected, and I'm sure all of you understand that. Let's see. Stuart here. Any watershed management plan in an urban area has three major stakeholders or components. One is municipal government, which can, and this is, these numbers really aren't set in concrete. In fact, I'm going to change these after this presentation, but municipal government can maybe address 50% of the load reductions. Citizen stewardship, possibly 35%. And redevelopment, possibly 15%. Now I'm going to change that. Some of the work that we are doing with the district right here, and in Baltimore, I think that redevelopment in certain communities can help meet our watershed goals and reduce our nutrient loadings by as much as 50%. And I'll explain a little bit about how that is possible. So the green renaissance is here. Every major city in the country is adopting LEED standards, planting trees, implementing green infrastructure. And a lot of this, a lot of the cities that initiated this, like Portland, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia now, everyone's talking about Philadelphia, but they're combined sewer overflow communities, and that gives them a ready funding source to put practices in the ground, the wastewater utility. Also, it's plainly and clearly obvious that providing green infrastructure and bioretention can keep stormwater out of the combined sewer, and that really increases the cost effectiveness of green infrastructure in these communities. But when you have a community that's on a separate sewer, some of the green infrastructure techniques can be contraindicated because they promote inflow, what's called inflow and infiltration into the sewer, which is responsible for sanitary sewer overflows. So in urban communities, you heard Arlington County has nice stream valley parks. Baltimore City does, the district does. It's much easier to apply restoration in these areas because you have to sell the community. These are shots in Baltimore City. You have to sell the community, and there's this connectedness of the community with the environment, and that really helps sell it. But in an ultra-urban core, how do you make that connection? There is, you have to sell the idea of a healthy neighborhood equals healthy streams, healthy harbor. You probably, if you stayed here last night, you heard about Baltimore City's healthy harbor effort that we're working on. This graph, the map to the right's interesting, and I'd like to focus on this for a second because you see all the red blotches. This is just maybe 1/3 or 40% of Baltimore City, but this can be any city. It can be the district, can be Philadelphia. Those red blotches are vacant properties, vacant lands. In one 900-acre watershed that we studied, there were about 3,000 vacant houses, vacant properties. And these vacant properties really cost millions of dollars for the housing authorities to maintain. And I'll talk about this more in a second, but as part of the center's work with Baltimore City in cleaning Baltimore Harbor, and we're also going to be working with the district, we were actually, at the suggestion of Baltimore City's Sustainability Office, we approached the Housing Authority to look at the stormwater retrofit potential of these thousands of vacant properties for the purpose of creating a stormwater retention bank that can help developers meet their stormwater management requirements and also provide a funding source for this very poor agency, Housing Authority, the Housing Authority. So, as I mentioned, in these ultra-urban areas, you have to develop a watershed plan that addresses the question of how do you restore a watershed when the quality of the neighborhoods needs to be restored. And that's where you need to find that intersection between the management practices that restore environmental quality and the management practices that improve the quality of life, namely green infrastructure. And one of the plans that the center has worked on is a watershed management plan for a small 900-acre watershed called Watershed 263. And 263, well, there are 355 major storm drains in Baltimore. This is the 263rd. We also worked on a Watershed 246 plan, and now we're scaling up to develop a plan for Baltimore Harbor. So the center has a lot of tools for actually, and we've used these in Arlington. We've been down here the past couple of weeks. But we have these watershed assessment tools, and we can really zone in on where we can retrofit. And it's interesting because the WIPs in Maryland, for instance, everyone talks about retrofitting as being a panacea. There's a 20 or 30% goal in the Maryland WIP. And retrofitting is great and something that the center is good at, but the the sad thing is, in a typical community, the retrofit potential is only about maybe 12%. So that means if you go downtown Arlington, for instance, or the district, if you want to put in retrofits in neighborhoods, you can only address about 12% of the land area. And that's where these vacant properties really can benefit a watershed management plan. Just as for instance, in this one watershed we were studying in Baltimore City, the retrofit potential there was 12%, but when you added these vacant lots, we found that we could retrofit as much as 30% of the area, and in some cities it might even be greater. Don't forget the public when you do these retrofits. This one study, I do want to also mention that one of the added benefits of retrofitting an urban area is not just the improvement to the quality of life, but the modelers, the people responsible for the WIPs, they have to use these very gross modeling tools and assumptions, these one-size-fits-all loading coefficients. But when you really do your own monitoring, and I know a lot of communities like the district in Arlington, Baltimore City are doing their own monitoring, you see that these ultra-urban areas are hotspots for nutrients, lead, heavy metals, and this is just the two middle bars. You can't see the numbers, that's not important. The two middle bars in this graph show the event mean concentrations for lead. It could be nitrogen, it could be cadmium, and the smaller bars are national averages and also more suburban watersheds. So you got a double bang for your buck by focusing your management practices in these ultra-urban corridors. And monitoring is a little complicated. I just love to show this slide just to show the resourcefulness of some of these watershed stewards. This is what a typical ultra-urban watershed looks like. This is Baltimore City. You can see the vacant houses, and but here are some of the opportunities. This is a schoolyard greening project, and these projects really do impart more than just the nutrient removal benefit. They do transform the community. These are tree planter boxes that drain a bioretention system. This is another bioretention, and just look at the difference in how the community looks before in the top part of your screen and after. Here's some other examples. And this is one of the vacant lots that we retrofitted with terraces and an infiltration system. And if you could imagine doing this on thousands of vacant lots that are available. In fact, Baltimore City has identified about 30 acres of vacant lots that they're going to use for urban agriculture. This is a website that we developed for Baltimore City that takes you through each step of putting a retrofit in the ground. And I'd mentioned in that pie chart, restoring urban watersheds is a three-way responsibility: municipal government, the redevelopment community, development community, and citizens. And there is this green renaissance, this urban greening movement, and Baltimore City and other cities across the country have been approached because they want their communities green for a number of reasons, not just they like the way it looks, they like the traffic calming effect, and they want to be part of the restoration efforts to restore the local waters. So I think I will end here. I do want to mention that we have this new Association of Watershed and Stormwater Professionals with our second peer-reviewed. It's the only organization, journal that focuses exclusively on watershed protection that's peer-reviewed. Our first article appeared last fall and concentrated on total maximum daily loads. And our next article will be published this winter, focusing on climate change. So,
Thank you, Bill. You see what a wonderful resource the Center for Watershed Protection is. Congressman Whitman has arrived, so remember your questions, write them down if you need to for this panel, because we'll have the Congressman speak first, and you'll ask him his questions. He'll be here between 10:15 and 10:30. He's right outside right now, so we're going to go get him to come in here, and we'll probably, there's another place to get a rural perspective coming from the Northern Neck.